All right, call this work session in order regarding stream setbacks. We'll start with roll call. We'll start with you, Mr. Gates.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Nice.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Jeff Urbanus, and I work for Watershed Management Services.
Okay. Forrest Dunbar.
Sean Weddleton.
Pete Peterson.
Okay. Do we have anybody on the phone? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Say it a little louder, Chris. We couldn't hear you. Okay, thank you. Go ahead and turn that volume up. So Chris Constant's also here. Okay, all right. Well, we only have one item on our agenda, so let's start with your presentation on AO 2018-67.
So I am having some technical challenges.
Okay. Lisa, could you show me how to turn the process the volume? It's just this.
Volume up?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes.
You get a chance to read your comments.
Chris, could you say your name again?
Yeah.
Christopher Constant.
Great, thank you.
I can't get the internet to work, but I get the rest of it to work.
Oh, Ira, are you on the bridge?
Yes,
We can't hear you, Ira. Hold on one second. Say your name again.
It's all the way up.
Okay, thanks, Ira. You have to speak up a little bit if you want to talk. Both of you guys, shoot me a text if you need to get in the queue.
Are we ready?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm just going to start off. I'm only able to show the PowerPoint, which is the most important part. But hopefully by the end here, we will be able to show the internet, because there is one of the outreach tools that we've set up for these proposed changes. It would be nice to show you folks that. So what I have here, and I should say, I'm Jeff Urbanus from Watershed Management Services. Also here is Christy from Watershed Management, Sean Odell from Planning, and Michelle McNulty, I think, is back there if we have any questions, maybe larger Title 21 stuff. What I have here is kind of a modification of the outreach that we've done thus far, mostly before the P&Z hearing. I can go through this kind of as quickly as possible and leave some time for discussion at the end, or up to you if you wanna. If I have questions as we're going through, stop me and we'll try and answer those questions. I mentioned one of the things is that this was public outreach. Prior to going to P&Z, we did reach out to a pretty large segment of the community. We hit each of the major land use kind of bodies in Eagle River, the Hillside, it was Girdwood, a number of the community councils, a number of the stakeholder groups. And towards the end of this presentation, I'll show some of the changes that were included as staff comments to P&Z, suggestions for changes to this ordinance that were adopted by P&Z and are part of the ordinance as it exists today. So I guess one of the first questions is, why are we even proposing changes at this time? And if you refer back to the current version of the stream code that was adopted in 2012, the introductory kind of purpose and needs section has these two goals here, or these two directives that direct staff to go back and figure out a way to come up with a code that has larger setbacks, but also secondly to figure out a way to provide relief to potentially impacted property owners. So a lot of what's in this AO kind of speaks back to these two goals. And just as a brief thing, I don't know how many of you were on the assembly then, that's largely because this issue, more than any other issue with Title 21 changes, received a lot of public testimony, and that public testimony kind of split pretty strongly between like a group that was in favor of large setbacks as large as like 100 feet, as well as people in the community who kind of didn't really want to see an increase at all. just sort of in the general sense, relative to other jurisdictions, both in the state and outside the state, we're pretty small. If you look just even at Alaska, the Matsu Borough has a 100-foot setback for water bodies. City and Borough Juneau has 50 feet, and the Kenai Peninsula Borough has 50 feet. So, being that most of the municipality today has a 25-foot setback, we're a little bit behind kind of where everybody else is, both in terms of practice and as well as science. What we chose to do, previous versions of the code, largely setbacks were any variation of setback was based on like a zoning district or like a planning district, and we elected to follow an approach that was more technical based and looked at kind of the individual streams themselves and what might be an appropriate setback versus not. One of the things that's always been a frustration, I think, both for the public and staff, is during previous versions of the code, you often had very small streams, on the hillside in Eagle River with setbacks as large as 100 feet. And worse than that, in many cases, there were no by right uses, so even crossing those streams for like a driveway would require a variance. Versus you went down to somewhere like Girdwood or a larger stream with Campbell Creek, and there was only a 25-foot setback. And just from a hydrological perspective, that just didn't make a ton of sense. So in employing our technical approach, kind of the ideas that we've had in mind is that in general, larger streams need larger setbacks. The characteristics of the stream itself sort of dictates what like a larger setback versus a smaller setback. So a meandering stream like Campbell Creek is going to require a larger setback just by its nature than something like Chester Creek, which is pretty entrenched and a little bit straighter. And amongst just sort of the biological aspects of it, we are a city, we are a place where people live, and certainly the pattern of adjacent development should sort of dictate what's appropriate too. Larger setback on Fish Creek is going to get much less benefit than like a larger setback somewhere up in Eagle River. One of the ideas that, really we just didn't think that the one size fits all, and that's largely what there was. And like I said before, if we're embarking on an effort to make larger setbacks, it makes sense to have those larger setbacks on larger streams with undeveloped areas adjacent to them than it would to go after small streams, small urban streams, and do a larger setback there. Why even have setbacks in the first place? It is actually something that we're asked often, like why do we even have to, why can't I just put my house right there? Their setbacks are beneficial to the community. They protect both private and public property from flooding and erosion. During flooding, they provide storage so that your water kind of stays adjacent to your streams, up closer to headwaters, and not down in your intersections and blocking traffic and that kind of thing. There is a water quality component to larger setbacks. Larger setbacks in general, most water quality parameters that the city would have to manage as part of the stormwater permit or something else, that task is made easier with larger stream buffers. And nationwide, numerous studies have shown that green spaces, intact buffers, those sorts of things do affect property values in a positive way. So one of the things, and I have another slide that kind of shows this, setbacks exist in a gradient, and in general, the larger setback that you have, the greater, maybe to both in magnitude and number of benefits that we're able to gain from that. So on the small setback end here on this, if we're talking about just 10 feet or something like that, maybe the only benefit we're getting is that we have stable banks. When we move to the other end of the spectrum, hundreds of feet, we're starting to talk about those buffers functioning in like an ecosystem as wildlife corridors and those sorts of things.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so this just happened to come to mind. We've been seeing all the pictures about all the flooding in different areas. I think it's on the East Coast mostly right now. Is that caused some of that caused by lack of setbacks from streams and rivers, or they just have too much pavement in the blacktop, that there's just no place for the rain to soak in anymore?
It's kind of both, you know. When a watershed goes through urbanization and you replace pervious surfaces like forest and that sort of thing with impervious surfaces like pavement, that runoff gets to the stream faster than it would normally. As well as when development encroaches on there, there's no, I mean, floodplains, natural floodplains adjacent to water bodies are a place to store floodwaters. And when development is pinching that, there's just less room to store that floodwater. And not only is it getting to the stream faster, it's traveling down the stream faster. And so you kind of have more water piling up, you know, in places. So like in Anchorage, you know, you're more likely to see flooding problems at like Arctic or Spenard along Chester Creek, or down near Minnesota on Campbell Creek, although that's a little higher up. But the answer is yes, buffers definitely play a role in providing minimizing flooding risk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I thought, just for simplicity's sake, I'd start by outlining what stays the same in what we've proposed. And I've underlined here because this is something that we're often asked as staff. Legally existing uses are grandfathered. That happened both previously in 1986 when the original stream setback ordinance was adopted. It might have been 84, and then again when we've had other small changes. So if you have a fence that's near a creek today, when this is passed, you'll have a fence near the creek, and it will be legally non-conforming. What we've proposed, the small streams in our community would stay at 25 feet, just as they are now. Many of the channelized and urbanized streams, so say like some of the areas of Fish Creek and the more developed areas of Chester Creek, those would also stay at 25 feet. And maybe speaking to that similar in a similar way, but more directly, any small lot size lots less than 10,000 square feet under what we've proposed would stay at 25 feet as well. So I've outlined here kind of what's proposed to change, and there's the big change, which is the larger setback, which I'll get to. But there are numerous other changes that are worth pointing out. We changed kind of to clarify how the code's administered, just some housekeeping with the code, stating current practice so that it's clear. So if someone's looking at a piece of property or looking at a development activity or that kind of thing, they clearly understand what is and what is not allowed. We've proposed that variances to this section go to ZEBA, not to UDC. That was, previously they went to ZEBA, and that changed in the 2012 version, the current version of the code. One of the things that we clarified with the 2012 version of the code, drainage ways, which could be something like a drainage ditch, but might also be some type of vegetated swale that's like falls short of like a stream. We introduced setbacks with those in 2012, and what this clarifies is different than streams where we're looking at protecting riparian habitat. Drainage ways are important in preserving the continuity of drainage. So there may be circumstances in where those might be moved, they may be enlarged, they may be stabilized, and it's not so much that we're trying to protect natural habitat adjacent to them. What we're trying to make sure is that water has the opportunity to point from flow from point A to point B.
Okay, so we have Mr. Gates, and then Mr. Welton, and then Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about the 10,000 square foot lot.
Sure.
And setback 25 feet. Would that be uniform no matter where the lot's located in the municipality?
That's correct.
It doesn't matter what type of, I guess, rather different categories.
Yeah, and in the code specifically,
I said 10,000 square feet would be uniform.
it's throughout the municipality, and in the code it says platted as of the date of adoption.
Mr. Welton?
Can you embellish a little bit? I mean, why? I'm not saying it's bad. I just wanted to understand why ZEBA instead of UDC for the variances.
This is a little bit inside baseball for me, so if I don't give you a satisfactory answer, I might defer to someone from planning. UDC in general is not a board that does variances based on dimensional standards. It's kind of maybe more design oriented, and ZEBA is typically the board where like dimensional standards go. Is that?
That's correct.
That's
Mr. Weldon, Mr. Dice.
I got 3 or 4 things I
Sure.
want to ask about Elizabeth, and I apologize for the call. It was actually important. How big does a stream have to be to qualify for the state or the city to have jurisdiction?
any size. So any size. We have it separately in the definition section of the code. We have a definition, working definition of streams that we've used for decades. It's pretty long, but basically the dividing line for something that would be a stream versus like a drainage way or an ephemeral channel is that you have defined bed and banks, and that you're seeing flow over an extended period of time and not just flow following like a rain event or snow melt.
Yeah. So I try not to stir my own experiences into these things. I have a little stream running down a property line where there's a 15-foot easement for that, and it's seasonal. You know, and at best it's 10 inches wide and a half inch deep. You know, when I bought the property, I went and got water rights on it, and the muni in its wisdom permitted a guy above me to put his leach field right across the creek. You know, when I got the water rights, I'd had it tested, and you know, within a few months it was hot. The city said, "Too bad, we never make mistakes. We can't go back on that." Which I chose not to fight it, but philosophically, I don't like doing widespread things that impinge on private property rights. I'd rather deal with areas that are problems. You know, but I realize there's problems there. Are we going to get into the situation here where we can really be accused of a taking, in that we restrain a property owner from beneficial use of his own land?
You know, I don't think so. Certainly, I'm not a lawyer. I don't work for the legal department. But I mean, I think there is, you know, case law across the country where, you know, these development setbacks are, you know, appropriate for the, you know, it's not that you lose access to your land. I mean, taking sort of involves you can't do anything there. And particularly with some of the changes that we've made there, and one of the things I think that were shortcomings of the previous code is I think that the previous code really didn't allow anything in the stream. So even for instance, something like a footpath, because someone lived near a creek and wanted to go down and see the water or those sorts of things. Those things actually were expressly, those were not permitted. And there have been instances, just, you know, from my experience, and, you know, as it sort of clouds me and forms my judgment, I mean, there have been instances where we were asked to come out to like keep kids from putting sticks in the creek. And we as staff, we were in a difficult position where it was like, well, geez, this isn't allowed in code. You know, so I think in this, particularly as they get a little bit further and there are some like what I would consider customary uses of a person's property that are spoken to both in the inner 25 feet as well as the increase that we're proposing. Because if you recall back to the first slide, we weren't just required to go do a larger setback. What we were also tasked with doing was kind of implementing some possible mitigation measures from that additional setback.
Yeah, I mean, that's legitimate. Did you just infer that some ways what we're doing here allows property owners more rights, and there's some benefits for somebody that fronts on a stream?
I think what's in the, I think that there's, when I talked about the part where I said that we did like kind of cleaned up the code a little bit, I think that there is a lot of language in there that speaks more to what people are allowed to do on their property that would be considered like reasonable.
Yeah, that, if I may, that interests me quite a bit. I tend to want people to be able to do everything that doesn't
Sure.
impinge on any webs downhill or downstream from their neighbors. The problem is kids to be able to cross this stream. You put a bridge across, does nothing, spans a long ways away. But most reservations like this I've seen wouldn't let that happen, even though there's no demonstrable danger to the creek.
And I think those small things, I've often remarked that I felt that our old code, at one hand, we told people that we thought that these were amenities and increased their private property value. And then on the other hand, we were sort of treating the stream setback as like a DMZ, where you just absolutely weren't allowed to do anything in there.
Yeah.
I think that those were a little bit in conflict. And so as we worked on creating what we've proposed, I think there are more allowances for kids playing in creeks and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I can show you in the code where those are, even on a side by side
and
comparison.
that's helpful, and I appreciate what I perceive to be your attitude about this. That's good. Thank you.
All right, let's push forward with this. I would like to actually see that kind of actual analysis of or your explanation of the text itself. I think if there are questions about taking, which I'm curious too, we have Ms. Wynn Pearson here. Are you, at the end, able to answer those kind of questions?
Certainly, if you want me to comment on that right now, I'm happy to, or I can wait till the end. Whatever you
Let's wait till the end and keep going. Go
So,
ahead.
and I'm going to just totally gloss through this. This next bullet here, in terms of vegetation removal of down trees, those sorts of things, that is part of what I'm talking about, where there's a little bit more straightforward criteria on what a homeowner can and can't do in that situation. And then one of the other changes, which I think is important, because this is something else that we've had difficulties with over the years as staff, is when someone brings in a development project that any reasonable person would think improves the goals of the stream code, what we want in managing our watersheds, green belts, and those sorts of things, but they don't fit neatly into one part of this code or the other, and there have been some really frustrating examples where we've let great be the enemy of good. And so this alternate means of compliance section in this code, and the proposed code, talks about activities that are not otherwise prohibited that further the goals of this code. It gives us a little leeway to approve those projects, and maybe just to, like, the briefest explanation would be, let's say that someone enjoyed an entitlement now, they had a parking lot that was 10 feet away from a stream, they're interested in kind of like a whole property approach to developing the green belts in their project, they're willing to give away part of their entitlement, but not perhaps all the way. So they're moving in the direction of compliance, but not meeting the code as it exists. Particularly as we think of some of the large lot redevelopment, I think this will be a useful tool in that. So, like, developments of the redevelopment of some of the large former trailer courts and those sorts of things. And then we'll get to later, the Anchorage Hillside is treated the same as the rest of the municipality. And I know that we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. What I wanted to show here is that what we didn't do was simply increase the size of the existing setback. We kept a core setback called the stream side zone, which is at 25 feet. For all intents and purposes, it's the same as the existing setback. And what the form of our increased setback is in this addition of a second area of setback called the riparian edge zone, and that varies based on the size of the stream. And that is still an area that is primarily for stream setbacks. It's intended to be pervious surfaces, but there are some allowances for things like transitional uses between the uplands and the more stream parts of the property, outbuildings, gardens, sheds, greenhouses, some lawn. So there are some allowances for those things. I mentioned that it's variable. This kind of briefly summarized how things are grouped. The largest streams in our community, Eagle River, Placer Creek, Portage Creek, you can see the list there. Those would be 25 feet of stream side zone and 75 feet of riparian edge zone. Kind of our middle tier streams, most of the major streams throughout the municipality, those would be 25 plus 25. Some of our smallest creeks and some of our creeks that are most heavily urbanized, those would remain at 25 feet Those include things like Fish Creek, Burrow Creek, Hood Creek. I mentioned that the stream side zone is essentially the same thing as the existing setback as it is today. It's the first 25 feet from ordinary high water. More or less, it's a non-disturbance zone. There are exceptions for trail, road, and utility crossings. There are, specifically allowed things like stream gauges, monitoring, fish platforms. One thing that we have proposed to change is that this area is only for unpaved trails. We're blessed with having large green belts and large green belt trails, but one of the kind of unintended negative consequences of that is we've also spent a tremendous amount of money, well into the millions, if not tens of millions, on bank restoration projects because of erosion from these trails. And so what we're proposing is any of those new large trails need to be 25 feet away from the stream. And this is the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's been a lot of, I think, confusing and misunderstanding thoughts on what we meant by this. When you have your streams 25 feet away, well, then you're with the question of how do you get to the creek. So that's where we say that unpaved trails, which does not necessarily mean dirt trails and it doesn't mean cattle wallows, it could be boardwalks, pervious pavement, wood chip surfaces, a number of pervious surface trails that would allow to get to a fish platform or to access the creek or those sorts of things.
Can I pause you there for a second?
Yeah.
So we just built a very nice new park in East Anchorage called Chanchny Muldoon Park, and there's a creek that runs through the middle of it, and we have a paved trail as part of the park there. I don't know, Chris, you think it's 25 feet? And is it more than 25 feet? It seems pretty damn close. We've got a bridge that crosses over it, so it's like actually on top of it. But that would all be permitted?
So we would say something like and I'm not familiar with the park, but I'm sorry, but like Camel Creek Trail, Chester Creek Trail, Fish Creek Trail, those are all like major paved trails. Those are, I mean, they need to cross the creek. There are allowances for crossing. What we're trying to eliminate is where you have long stretches of creek and trail running parallel to each other, because those are where those problems are happening. So we'd like to see those trails pushed further away, and if there's a need to get closer to the creek for whatever the reason is, that those are done on, I mean, essentially a lot of our bike trails are mini roads. We'd like to see some of our smaller trails, whether they're social trails or soft surface trails, boardwalks. Like I think a great example would be the Chester Creek Nature Trail, if anyone's familiar with that. That's a trail that runs kind of like just a little bit upstream of Spenard. Yeah, just upstream of Spenard, upstream maybe towards Arctic, and it runs parallel to the creek, 5-6 feet away. What we've planned for the future on that is like a boardwalk rather than like a paved surface trail, so that you have the ability to, your banks are more resistant to erosion. You don't, like, one of the things that happens when trails are close to the creeks is inevitably parks maintenance ends up mowing it. Then the vegetation's lost, and I don't know if anyone's been on like Green Hill Way, that area of the Chester Creek Trail, Rovina. I mean, we're currently spending like lots of money to fix where trails encroached on the creek, and that's what we're trying to avoid. But I mean, certainly if a creek runs through the middle of a park, then...
Well, yeah, a creek that we've diverted many times as well. It's not really a natural creek anymore. Yeah, Fred?
So, did I read somewhere or somebody tell me that existing creek right-of-ways are going to be grandfathered in?
Yes.
Okay, your comment a little earlier is spooky to me because we're in big suits with the federal government, and they're saying we have jurisdiction over all navigable waters.
Right.
And you can float very small boats. Now they've decided that any streams or water bodies that contribute to a stream that becomes navigable, an order of magnitude expansion of their authority. So when I asked you about a little tiny creek, you said, yeah, and this creek I'm talking about, you can't even see it for the first 100 feet on my property, and 300 feet downhill it disappears again for a half a mile. And I was cool with the 15-foot offset because it was on the deeds when I bought it. But that kind of, by your definition of what's a creek, scares me about what we're might be authorizing government to do in the future.
I guess I would say this, and I could, we have the program that we administer. The Corps has the program that they
Right.
administer. We are, so let's say that someone was looking at a development project, and I'm trying to think if there's a recent example where, and it's escaping me what it is, but there have been numerous. The stream makes their judge. The Corps of Engineers makes their call at what is a stream. We have our definition of what is a stream. There have been instances, not a lot, but there's some pretty prominent examples where we don't believe that something's a stream. The Corps does.
Who
So
wins?
what happens is where your federal permitting requirements are concerned, you meet those. Where your municipal permitting requirements, we enforce a lesser standard. So there have been instances where you have not had to meet the setback standards, even though the Corps was calling something a creek. And I can think of like one instance on the hillside.
I don't need that. But here within our property, our boundaries,
Well, I can't
what
do
does
anything.
the
We can't do
Corps-
anything to like say that you don't follow the Corps' guidelines, but we do. We operate independently, and when it comes to the municipal aspects of the permit, let's say you're getting like a building permit. The Corps may require you to do a wetlands permit, may require all this other thing, but it is possible, and there have been instances where we've not made you. So maybe we would consider it a drainage way and an ephemeral stream and not a stream. So when it comes to the municipal aspects of the building permit or something like that, you may be closer.
Okay.
So I can think of one instance on the hillside where there's a stream that we know clearly is from a footer and foundation drain, and we've shown both through like historical stuff and our knowledge of it and the rest of it that stream did not exist until the footer and foundation drain that was built in a wetlands discharged to the ditch. The Corps of Engineers has called that a jurisdictional stream. We continue to call it a drainage way. So
Okay, all right.
it happens.
A quick follow-up. Does the grandfathering that you're talking about persevere through a title change or a change of ownership?
Sure. And you could just look at,
Just saying yes
yes,
is fine.
yeah.
Thank
Look at
you.
all of Chester Creek. There's plenty of stuff along Chester Creek, like around Baxter Elementary. There's lawn within 5 feet of the creek. There's fences within 5 feet of the creek, and it's been that way since 1978 through multiple.
Okay, you answered my question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, let's go on to the riparian zone.
Riparian edge zone. It starts at 25 feet and is either 50 or 75 feet based on the size of the stream. Like I said, it's an area that's still reserved for stream setback, but there are allowances. I mentioned before, paved trails is where we'd like to see those uses on a person's property for things like deck, accessory structures, greenhouses, sheds, those sorts of things. One of the things that we did hear from actually the hillside, and we think was a very valuable piece of input, and we did put in, was that like a cagey person could sort of, I'm going to put my lawn here, I'm going to put my garden here, I'm going to put my shed here, and I'm going to put my greenhouse over there, and then all the rest of it. The next thing you know, you've occupied the whole entire area. What we've clarified and what's in the AO is those all need to occupy the same footprint. So collectively, all of these allowed uses can't be more than half the riparian edge zone. Some of the issues that we heard in public during the public outreach that were adopted by P&Z, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly just so that maybe there's time for discussion at the end. There are some criteria that are laid out on when you may be able to change the location of a stream. It was pointed out to us that there are potential ramifications of that if you moved it so that it impacted your property owner. We just added an additional criterion that said that you can't do that. We had originally proposed that Eliesker Creek would be 25 plus 25 feet, and we heard very strongly from the community that that was not something that they supported, particularly as it regards to the small lots that are platted along Eliesker Creek, and we've made that change, and that's what's in the packet here. One of the things particularly we heard from Turnagain and Spenard community councils was their interest in a Fish Creek trail, and they felt that some of what we proposed here might impact their ability to pull off like a trail that went to the ocean. So we just added some language in the alternate means of compliance section that talked about that greenway projects and other projects that are part of the comp plan are kind of like what this alternate language is speaking to. Steve, did I that? One of the things that we said was that because we've had increasingly we're getting more requests for hydro generation on people's property. We had language in there that said that power generation infrastructure was allowed with like a conditional use in the streamside zone. Immediately people thought we were talking about like coal-fired plants or something like that. So we added the word hydro there. That's what we were referring to. I mentioned earlier the riparian edge zone cumulative area.
So point of, or I think you must be missing a few words in that last bullet. Because riparian edge zone is half of the total. That's 25. You mean development?
What you're right. There is a word. The allowances there can't be greater than half. So your lawn can't be half, and then you have a greenhouse, and then you have it, and then you have, and then you have.
You might want to add the structures in or something.
Noted.
Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're talking that in-stream hydro electric generation would be allowed within the municipality language?
Yeah, and there's been a number of instances where we're permitted. There's one that's going through the permitting process right now.
They include dams?
Well, I mean, that has a whole separate FERC thing, but yeah, essentially. But what we're talking about is like, and it's in your neck of the woods, the Ram Valley, things like that. There's been some requests also Eagle River Valley, like Crystal Creek, that kind of thing. There's the South Fork one. There's been people kicking around mostly in Eagle River, but as well in Girdwood and stuff like that. Folks who want to do small hydro. I think that's a benefit to the community, and we didn't think that the stream setback itself should be something that wouldn't allow that. That's not to say that it's willy-nilly, you can do what you want. There's separate approval processes, but like in the instance of like the Ram Valley thing, his timing was poor, so he needed to like get a variance for the pen stock for his project, and it just didn't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
So for one of the things that we heard from some of the large landowners, Providence, UAA, the resort, that they often invest lots of money into these multi-year, multi-phase master plans, and they were concerned that the possibility of like pulling the rug out from underneath them, halfway through the process. So for the purposes of this chapter, we've changed the definition of legally established means legally constructed, permitted, or approved as part of a conditional use or master plan. Allowances for substantially damaged structures to be rebuilt, and so that's not like something that someone electively knocked down, but something that was destroyed in flooding or fire or that kind of thing that they could rebuild within the streamside zone. In the 2012 changes, there was some language that encouraged the tracting out of wetlands, and actually was pretty directive and prescriptive in it. And it was pointed out to us that when a person goes to do development and is starting to think about their open space calculations and the rest of it, that we were creating like a negative disincentive to do that. The idea was that by tracking it out, you wouldn't have like a preservation wetlands across 10 properties, and then over time everybody moves the fence 3 feet closer in, and then 20 years later it doesn't exist. We're law of unintended consequences. So there's some language that changed those requirements. I talked about before the paved versus the unpaved trails. P&Z added some additional thing that those unpaved trails, those pervious trails, that they can be no wider than 3 feet. in discussing this with the park department, they had concerns about that number. They are suggesting that we change that to 8. So that is actually something that I think the Parks Department would like to see an amendment from one of the assembly members. And the concern is that it is possible to have ADA accessible trails that are soft surface. ADA calls for 4 feet, but there have been a number of instances recently where I guess as like wheelchairs are getting more fat tire oriented as well, and that 4 feet's a tough turning radius for those things. And so Parks has received comments from folks who have like with wheelchairs and that kind of thing, who would like to see those soft surface trails, although they can access them, they'd like to see them with a little bit wider turning radius.
One second. Mr. Gates, you have a question?
I was going to ask about the ADA requirements and if that was for wheelchair access. So I guess you kind of answered that. Do you think the 8 feet is so that 2 wheelchairs can pass each other?
No, my understanding was like fat tire wheelchairs that those exist now, and 4 feet kind of doesn't allow turning radius.
Ooh, some of those motorized wheelchairs that are rather long, perhaps.
I think it's they're just beefy.
8 feet just seems way excessive.
That we're deferring to the Parks Department on that, but they basically, I think these guys are looking maybe pictures of those wheelchairs, but the Parks Department was kind of operating on the 4-foot ADA thing, and they've been chastised that that's maybe not quite enough.
Mr. Weldon?
I don't want to seem insensitive, but 8 feet's like crazy wide. And if you have 50%, maximum 50% cumulative disturbance, and a third of it is your 8-foot wide trail, you don't have room for much else.
Well, I mean, right now we have trails that are 25 feet wide when you include the clearing limits and the rest of it. And I'm not saying that the trail itself has to be. I mean, I'm sort of relaying Parks, what was related to me with Parks. I mean, right now we have trails that are, 10, 12 feet wide in pavement with an additional 10 feet on either side. So what we had talked about was smaller trails to sort of protect the more pervious and the rest of it. And the feedback that we got from Parks was that the 3 feet that P&Z proposed is like no way near 4 feet's ADA, and the feedback that Parks has been getting is that's not sufficient for the uses that are existing in the disabled community. And that's all secondhand.
We'll have to, if they want that amended, they'll have to find a assembly member to put that forward. Okay.
And that's the end of what I have.
Great. So we don't have a lot of time left. Yeah, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
What's that? Yeah, I was going to have both any other staff from the administration. So Ms. Wynn-Pearson, Ms. McNulty. Right, okay, sorry. And does anyone else want to comment on this?
Mr. Chair, if you'd like to comment on the takings doctor
Sure.
question. The court generally will not find that a regulation is a per se taking unless it absolutely destroys the economic value of property. The court does consider on a case-by-case basis a sort of incremental offsets to the value of a property that occur as a result of regulation. And we actually litigated a very similar issue in 2001 when the municipality imposed a 20-foot wetland setback around certain lakes within the municipality, and we were successful in that instance. The court concluded that the public, at that point they weighed the public benefit and the private benefit of that type of regulation. They concluded the public benefit of a wetland setback ordinance outweighed the impact on individual property owners of losing developable capacity of that 20-foot. I suppose there is the possibility that there is some individual parcel of property in the municipality that will be more substantially damaged depending on the size of the property and the size of the 2 zones on that specific property. I assume in that instance the recourse would be to the variance process provided in the ordinance, where they're able to go and ask and say, I can't develop my property in any way because of this ordinance, please provide a variance, and that would be the recourse. But generally I think that this would fall in the same category as the ordinance we defended in 2001.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. McDonald, do you have any other comments? Mr. Schutte, anything?
Sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Weldon provided us with this very long document here, and I'm sort of worried. I don't think we're going to be able to get through this in the time remaining.
I don't.
Mr. Schutte?
I was just going to add, Assemblymember Welton and staff and I had an offline conversation that what we'd like to do, considering the short amount of time, is that, if you'd open it up for public comment, it'd be respectful of the people who have showed up and would like to say something. And our approach would be to go through Assemblymember Welton's comments and suggested edits and come back to you in the second work session or in a CEDC meeting, whatever you choose, and work through them together in sort of an issue response fashion like we did with ADUs, just to help expedite the process.
Remind me, this is being introduced or public
Being
hearing?
introduced on Tuesday.
Okay, just introduction, so we
Yes.
have time for another work session.
Correct.
Okay. Are you amenable to that,
I think
Mr.
that's the best
Welton?
way to go.
Okay, so we have 10 more minutes now. We'll hear from members of the public. Chris, would you mind turning the light back on?
You bet.
Can I add one thing before we go there?
Okay.
Sorry.
Just very briefly.
Yeah, one of the things that I hope to show the assembly members is that we have a map out there that shows the impacts of all this, and technology is failing us yet again. If you go through the municipal webpage, and I'll send it out to the assembly members where that is, but it shows what the changes look like on the ground, links to the documents, shows the Hillside District Planning Area, shows the 10,000 square foot lots, shows what the proposed setback would be and what the existing setback is. And I wish it's a great outreach tool, and I wish I was able to share it with you today.
Well, I think you'll have a second work session and we should do that. Yeah.
Jeff, maybe it's part of what you would show in that list of things, but I know when Title 21 was being done, and one reason we kicked this down a few years, but there was a really good thing the planning department did that showed Camel Creek and I think one other creek, and drew where would a 25-foot hit, and showed relatively few homes were really impacted. Do you have that? That really speaks to what
we have
Fred
stuff
was
like that. One of the things that's a little difficult in that operation is that the stream setback is actually from the edge of the stream, and our stream mapping is the stream center lines, and having like a stream edge setback is just impractical. So there's ways we've kind of fussed with that a little bit to like give a buffer so that like we're actually showing what like 27 feet touches and that sort of thing. So we do have some things that way. I mean, I do think it's safe to say that like Campbell Creek's just not going to be touched, but particularly when you get to the smaller things, I think that's less of a thing. One of the things that you can see on the hillside, and that you can see where the smaller streams are. What's also as a tool of this, you can click on Google Earth and actually see, because one of the things we've heard about is like the ditches and those sorts of things, and those things having a 50-foot setback, and maybe that's not what the intent was of the Hillside District Plan. So, I mean, we'd be happy to work with you and get you more. I guess what I'm trying to say more than anything else is.
No, I was thinking more in the urban part of town. There was some, when I said Camel Creek, I was thinking down there in the flatlands. I just remember there were some good examples that were done at that point.
I think with the urbanized areas being at 25 feet, I think that's less of a issue than before. Particularly when like Chester Creek by Baxter Elementary. I mean, when that's just being 25 feet, it's not really an issue of whether or not those are being impacted or not.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so the chair recognizes the 30-something member from South Anchorage.
I will be very quick because I want you to hear our two resident biologists.
Yes.
And I'd like to clarify something for some assembly members. Remember, Title 21 does not make policy. It only implements. And Title 21 says there shall be 50 feet undisturbed for the Hillside District Plan area. And this has worked very well for several years. This is not a problem. And at the February PZ hearing, at least 4 commissioners asked staff for language to maintain the Hillside District Plan's 50 feet setback. But in the 4 months later that they met, that request wasn't honored, and the minutes did not even reflect that is what staff wanted. Commissioners wanted. And so that kind of got lost through the cracks in 4 months, which is really a shame. One commissioner said the Hillside residents shouldn't be punished for being forward-thinking and setting the 50-foot setbacks in 2010, and that is in the minutes, which I took the trouble to transcribe. Now, the outer 25 feet of this riparian zone essentially can be disturbed and reduces it to where we're like the rest of the city. Therefore, we are making one size fits all. And the hillside does deserve to keep the 50 feet setback. I think many of us feel that the 10,000 square foot lots can have 25, and those are in the lower hillside. So, the last thing I'd like to say is, the rest of the U.S. is desperately trying to get back even 50 feet. And they do not set their setback standards, whether a stream is named or not, because many of them are very significant.
Thank you. Solms, could you please state your name for the record?
Of course. My name is Vivian Mendenhall. I'm a professional wildlife biologist, retired, and certainly not a hydrologist. On the other hand, my profession definitely involves habitat concerns. Otherwise, you can't preserve anything. I'd just like to say that a lot of this sounds good for a lot of the city, and there's improvements that would be good for the hillside as well. However, the watershed management has stated they would like to consider streams one by one rather than one size fits all, and yet that's what we're being offered for the hillside. I'm reading directly from Mr. Weddleton's proposed changes that, as you say, are a little long to consider right now. The combination of steep slopes and higher rainfall on the hillside, which are documented by watershed management themselves in their own plans and data, means that the higher streams and many of the small streams are going to be taking the brunt of the kind of rainfall we're getting now because they're higher. And we're going to have more rainfall as time goes on. There's an article in the paper just today explaining climate change for the basic level understanding. More intense events will be common. The state of Alaska requested that a 50-foot setback be retained at least on the first order streams, the smallest ones, that are hard to notice, maybe intermittent, you could step over them, maybe you don't notice them, but they determine what's going to happen all the way down each stream farther. Secondly, naming of streams is not a scientific way of deciding what kind of protection they deserve. They just mean places where people found it less easy to walk because they were steep and higher up. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here from the public who'd like to speak? Please state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Ann Rappaport. I'm also a resident of the Hillside area. Also happen to be a retired federal biologist. I supervise the Anchorage Fish and Wildlife Field Office, where we worked with the municipality on many of the stream restoration projects in the city. And as Jeff's comments were very apropos regarding it costs a lot more to restore streams and try and provide function and try and prevent other properties from being damaged because of bad previous decisions than it does to protect them now. And also, I think Diane and Vivian well stated the science that shows the hillside is a lot different. It's steeper, you just cannot, and the lots are generally larger, which befits the steeper area there, needed to protect the drainages, so you can't necessarily have the same restrictions that you have for the rest of the city. And we really need that 50-foot setback that's from the Hillside District Plan, which a lot of people, time and money went into determining, and a lot of science into that. Also want to mention the contribution of the hillside area to Potter Marsh. It's a state critical habitat area, and from a positive economic standpoint for the city, there's like 100,000 visitors a year there, and there's tour buses that stop by. It's a really important economic engine, and we all know that tourism is one of the really bright spots, I think, in our economic future as a city and as a state. So anything that would, if we pull back on our protections for hillside area streams, Potter Marsh is going to suffer, so will the resources there and that ultimate economic benefit. So both for the natural resources that we all enjoy and the safety of our lots and our streets. We really need that 50-foot setback on hillside area plans. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there any other comments from the public? Any other from my colleagues? Chris or Ira, anything you'd like to say?
Nothing from Ira, thanks.
Okay, then we will have another work session between this and, when is that for public hearings? The 14th or 28th?
We believe it's the 14th, but I don't have a copy of the agenda in front of me.
14th?
I know it before.
Okay, great. We will have another work session before the 14th. This work session is adjourned.